Chapter 1. Tanlin watched Fyevna gaze toward the overcast sky. The billowing clouds of dark purple from the night had begun to turn a lighter violet with the coming of the morning. She held before her a rounded wooden contraption small enough for her to set steadily in the palm of her hand. Tanlin stood a good distance in front of Fyevna and watched her absent eyes stare into the dark clouds above them. Her light, steel-gray skin seemed to glow faintly, the dawn's violet light reflecting off her face in an entrancing way. The night clouds over Zayeth, Fyevna's soul city, never darkened like they did this far away from the city, and the color blend the dimness created felt foreign to him. Fyevna's long and flowing white hair lightened with each passing minute as night turned to day. Though Fyevna was just shy of her 20th year, 3 years Tanlin's junior, she held herself with a form and maturity that made her seem much older, as if she understood more and had experienced so much more in life than Tanlin ever could. The sound of snapping twigs diverted Tanlin's attention to the forest that circled around the clearing where he stood. From under the darkness of the trees appeared Zayeth. Despite being accepted as a soldier, who were typically tall, Zayeth stood only an inch taller than Tanlin. Regardless of Zayeth's smaller height as a soldier, he was strong, with defined muscles on his lean frame. Nearly double Tanlin's age, there were noticeable lines across Zayeth's face that Tanlin's did not possess. The dark gray armor Zayeth wore was made of Fyevna, a material formed from the bark of a tree of the same name. The Fyevna was several shades darker than Zayeth's skin tone and looked dull in the low light. The same Fyevna protection was also made into a sheath for Zayeth's sword at his side. Zayeth approached Tanlin, softening his steps to avoid any more sudden sounds. Tanlin returned his attention to Fyevna. "Anything?" Zayeth asked from Tanlin's side. "No," Tanlin whispered back with a voice that sounded light compared to Zayeth's deeper voice. "And I don't think she's going to find anything either." "Seems she should. Fyevna isn't far now. There should be at least a hint of the Zayeth she can find." Tanlin shook his head. No, I don't think so. She could see something this close, I agree, but if there's nothing for her to detect, then it's probably what we've been thinking." Maybe. Standing here, though, won't tell us, will it? We aren't more than a couple hours. How long has she been standing there? "Long enough," Tanlin answered. Fyevna had indeed been standing there longer than was necessary. If there was no Zayeth for her to see, then reaching Fyevna as quickly as possible should be their course of action. Tanlin took a couple steps closer to her. "Fyevna," Tanlin said quietly, "if you haven't seen anything, maybe we should leave now." Fyevna didn't seem to notice what he said and continued her stance in the clearing. "Fyevna," Tanlin repeated, slightly louder. "I think—" "Fyevna!" Zayeth shouted. Fyevna jumped at the shout and quickly cupped her empty hand over the file she was holding. "Don't be a fool, Zayeth. I would have answered Tanlin when I was ready. What if I had dropped my Zayeth?" "You didn't drop it. Now let's get going. If you can't see anything, then there's no sense wasting away here." Tanlin could see Fyevna wasn't quite finished with Zayeth's scolding, but rather than continue with the back and forth with her Fyevna, her personal protector, Fyevna instead pulled out from one of her robe's pockets the seal for her round contraption. "Actually," Fyevna said, "I didn't see nothing." Then she paused for a moment. "Yes, I said that right. I didn't see nothing. Or I guess I saw something is what I should have said. That would have been much clearer." Fyevna began sealing her small round device. The process was intricate, consisting of a cap, wires, and clasps that encased the entirety of the wooden vessel. "What did you see?" Tanlin asked. Sepheln hadn't spoken to him on a multitude of occasions seeing the Zayeth, as all Sealevnans could, but they were under a different circumstance now, dealing with something other than what was normal. Despite the urgency Tanlin felt for an answer, Sepheln seemed to be taking her time with sealing her Sieveth before answering the question. Perhaps she was making Narrate wait longer before they left the clearing, just to remind him who was in charge. That seemed like something Sepheln would do. "I don't know what I saw," Sepheln said, and Narrate scoffed. "Oh, for the love of El itself, let's get on with it then." Narrate tightened the pack on his back and started to walk away. "I don't know what I saw," Sepheln repeated, this time forcefully, stopping Narrate in his tracks and forcing him to listen to her. "I don't know, but it's something I've never seen before or have heard of any other Sealevnan seeing. Where there should have been normal flowing Zayeth, there was only black." "Black?" Tanlin asked. "What do you mean by black? Were you seeing something else?" Sepheln shook her head. "That's why I concentrated so long. I didn't believe what I saw at first. I mean, how unusual would that be? But very distinctly I could see them. Little black specks that flowed toward Mezziot from the direction of Threvenelt. When dawn lightened the clouds, though, they disappeared." Tanlin stared at Sepheln, his brows furrowed. While different forms of the Zayeth had been recorded in the past, albeit with little evidence, he couldn't recall anyone having seen one with a black or spotted depiction. Tanlin had never read, of course, every book ever written on the Zayeth and its power, but he had read most, not to mention the hours and days spent listening to lectures about the Zayeth's possible origins and known behaviors. As important as the Zayeth was to the preservation of each of their lives, it was remarkable how little they truly understood its power. "We should follow Narrate," Tanlin said, walking towards Sepheln's warder. Narrate had already stepped into the darkened woods. "You don't believe me?" Sepheln asked. Tanlin looked back and saw the Sealevnan not having moved from her place in the middle of the glade. Her arms were crossed, a telling sign from Sepheln that she wasn't going to move on until the matter was settled. "I believe you saw what you said you saw, Sepheln. Once we reach Threvenelt, I'm sure we'll have our answer. Our situation isn't entirely unique, you know. It's been shown that quite often in the past the Zayeth was cut off between the villages and Mezziot. Each time it was due to someone not following the proper systems in place with no other factors involved." "I know," Sepheln said, walking now toward Tanlin. "It just seems odd, especially since it began in a weakened state. That's how we first noticed it, after all. You have your classes and your books, but I have my feelings, and I can actually see what's happening. I'm telling you, Tanlin, something is odd." "Sepheln," Tanlin said. He thought he heard her slowen her step momentarily before continuing her normal pace. "You're right. There are things that you see that I have never studied or written a paper about. But there is a reason that a Sealevnan is required to choose a Fyevnathan. When one of us—" "I know, Tanlin," Sepheln said. "No need to explain to me what I know already like I'm a child." Tanlin nodded and let the conversation end. No need to press if it would only lead to further argument. Tanlin stepped to the side to let Sepheln walk in front of him and safely behind Narrate. The forest was almost too dark to walk through safely. Despite being able to see well in dim lights, the lights present in the city of Mezziot made it more difficult for those from the city to see in the dark compared to people from the villages. Narrate wished to press on as best as they could, even if it meant at a slower pace. But when Tanlin nearly rolled his ankle on a jutted tree root the first night after setting out from Mezziot, Narrate begrudgingly agreed not to travel at night. Actually, it had been Fyevna that convinced Narrate. Narrate ignored Tanlin's complaints until she spoke up for him. Tanlin thought on multiple occasions bringing up the fact that he was a Fyevnathan, which should supersede Narrate in any decision-making. He didn't mind Fyevna making decisions, since the decisions she made were mostly sound, but Narrate was a different story. Maybe one day he'd use his position against Narrate, but he felt content avoiding that battle as long as possible. Narrate led the trio onward and set a pace faster than their first 2 days. Threvenelt was not far away. Tanlin couldn't help but think if he had not been so soft, then they would have arrived the night before. Regardless, they would get there eventually and then finally end the questions that had been pressing them. There was even a decent chance he would be back in his studies by the end of the week. It was odd that the Zayeth dwindled from Threvenelt. Normally, the villages surrounding Zayeth would have an assigned CL11, who would make the venture from Zayeth every month to replenish the Zayeth in the villages to sustain the local people. Rarely would the Zayeth deplete before that time, and on those rare occasions a CL11 would show up just a couple days later from Zayeth, ready to replenish each village. He knew something was odd about Threvenelts when it was reported to him. Only 2 weeks after the Zayeth had been replenished there, its tether to Zayeth began to diminish. Tanlin frowned, thinking about it. The Zayeth was either present or it was not, so a dwindling of its power seemed incorrect. But if everything Fyevna and the other CL11 saw was to be believed, and there was no reason not to believe them, then a dwindling of the Zayeth is exactly what they were dealing with. Tanlin followed Fyevna, watching her feet as she stepped across rocks and over roots. The violet morning light pierced through the trees. He didn't need to watch his step if he just placed his to match Fyevna's. What made this simple task difficult was the pattern of purple that decorated the ground. Some spots showed brilliantly bright from the cloud light, while others possessed a deeper color from the light shining through the leaves. Stepping through this palette was mesmerizing, and Tanlin had to look up and blink himself from the trance more than a handful of times. "We must be getting close?" Fyevna asked. Tanlin looked up and nearly stumbled as he did. "Yes," Narrate answered. "You'll have your questions answered shortly." Presently, the trees thinned and eventually faded altogether. Before them was a low embankment, lined with a thick hedge of bushes and branches along the top. The first thing Tanlin always noticed about these bushes were the large thorns that filled them. He stepped closer to the grassy ridge and examined the hedge wall. Narrate shot his arm out, making him stop, and said, "Just wait. They know we're here." Tanlin stepped back and looked along the hedge. "I don't see anyone." "Neither do I," Fyevna said. "No one knows we're coming either." "Wait," Narrate repeated. "Even if you tried to march in yourself, you'd be hard-pressed to find the entrance. Just wait." Tanlin looked at the hedge and then at Narrate. The Fyevna was right. Though they had visited this village a few times previously, the entrance into Threvenelt was different on each of their visits. The people either found this useful in some way, or perhaps entertaining to watch visitors seek out the new locale to enter the village. Tanlin watched Narrate close his eyes and breathe deeply. Fyevna shrugged and sat on the ground. The grass was high and thick, and enclosed her slight stature effortlessly, and entwined with her flowing white hair. Tanlin scratched his neck, then pulled back his short hair a few times. Not that his appearance mattered much to Narrate or Fyevna, but as a Fyevnathan from Zayeth, he should represent himself as best he could. He looked down at his clothes. Gray seemed an odd choice, as it was so contrary to the white robes he and other Fyevna wore in Zayeth. But tradition, for tradition's sake, may be suitable enough reason from time to time. Whether he was fond of it or not, his garb would have to do. Narrate sighed loudly. He tapped the hilt of his sword as he looked along the wall of bushes. Seeing Narrate's sword reminded Tamlin of his own, and he reached down to feel for it. Unlike Narrate's scabbard, Tamlin's was made of simple wood. The sword itself was not even his, but it was customary for anyone venturing out of Zayeth to carry one, save for the Fyevna. Narrate was visibly irritated now and shifted his weight from one side to the other and scratched the top of his head. In fact, this was the most irritated Tamlin had seen Narrate since they were told they needed to make this special excursion. "It's a good thing you're patient, Narrate," Tamlin said. "This may take a while." Narrate huffed and stepped toward the embankment. Unfortunately, this meant that he had missed Tamlin's smirk. But there would be other opportunities to take advantage of Narrate's general disposition of irritation. "They know we're here," Narrate said as he began a stern march up the hill. "Where are they?" When Narrate had nearly reached the hedge wall, Fyevna stood and yelled, "Wait! Stop!" Narrate stopped and turned back. "What is—" "It's back, but worse," Fyevna said hurriedly. "The black Zayeth is strong now. The bits of black are thick and coming quickly over the hedge." Fyevna looked to be in a panic. Her eyes flashed back and forth above them, as if trying to locate the source of an echo. Tamlin stepped toward her to attract her attention. "Fyevna," he said. Fyevna blinked and turned her gaze to him. "We'll find out soon enough. Look ahead and stay close to Narrate." Fyevna, looking perturbed, nodded and moved forward. Tamlin looked up to see Narrate waiting for Fyevna to come near his side, before producing a journal and writing utensil from an inside pocket of his robe. Quickly, he scribbled in short form what Fyevna had spoken to him before following Narrate and Fyevna to the hedge. "What are you going to do?" asked Fyevna, staying a half step behind Narrate. "Get through this shocking wall." Narrate reached the top of the short embankment and stood in front of the hedge. Tamlin settled his weight on one leg awkwardly on the slope and peered around Narrate. The hedge was thick, so much so that Tamlin couldn't see past the first couple feet of twisted and gnarled branches and full leaves. Thorns an inch long lined most of the branches. "No need for weapons when you have a hedge at your disposal," Tamlin said flatly. Narrate mumbled something that Tamlin couldn't make out. "Only way through is by someone granting us access from the other side," Narrate said. "It appears, though, either we are being ignored or there's no one on the other side." Narrate looked back at Tamlin with brows raised. "So, how do we get in?" Tamlin asked. "We need to hurry," Fyevna said. "Something is not right. The black, it's just not right, but I don't know what it is." "Same as before?" Tamlin looked above them, knowing he couldn't see what Fyevna could, but he stared anyway. "It hasn't stopped, and there's more, and they're going faster toward Zayeth. Oh, wait, they are changing." Fyevna turned from the hedge and toward the forest, in the direction of Zayeth. She stumbled a couple steps down the hill, her sight focused above her. "The black Zayeth reversed. Now it's going from Zayeth to Thravenelt." Fyevna's arms were stiff at her side and her fingers flexed and tensed. Her brows furrowed and she shook her head at what she was seeing. Tamlin was close enough to reach out to steady her, but instead his Fyevna mind took hold, and he opened his small black journal once again to jot down what Fyevna was describing. "Fyevna, I need you to tell me what you see," he said, already writing down Fyevna's most recent comments. Fyevna shook her head with closed eyes, but then opened them with determination and nodded once. This Zayeth is very different," she began. "Black, not the normal shades of violet. But it's more than that. They are disjointed. They? Tamlin asked, pausing and looking up at Sepheln. Yes, they. The Zayeth normally is like a stream, a steady flow. These black... Sepheln paused a moment. Black droplets are separated. They look like specks, but some are considerably larger than others. And they're erratic. They are all moving directionally the same, but they shake and jump back and forth along the way, like they are unsure of themselves. Sepheln paused and Tamlin glanced at Narrate to assess his reaction. The warder still stood, facing the hedge of thorns. Tamlin doubted Narrate was even paying attention to Sepheln. Something as significant as a change in the Zayeth, and he just stood there. Tamlin focused his attention again on the gaping Sepheln. You said it's flowing toward Threvenelt. What do you mean? This time, Sepheln looked away from the light violet clouds and glared at Tamlin. What do you mean, what do I mean? Exactly what I said. It's not moving toward Mezayet, but to Threvenelt. The Cialevnim reverted her attention again to the air above her. It's just odd, Tamlin said. I don't remember ever reading the Zayeth reversing its course. Doesn't mean I'm lying or crazy, Sepheln snapped. Something's wrong, Narrate suddenly said. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Sepheln yelled. Something different than your Zayeth, beyond the... It's not my Zayeth, Sepheln huffed. It belongs to... Of course, Narrate said as he waved a hand. There's something else, though. Look. Narrate nodded to the barrier of bushes and branches. Tamlin noticed immediately something different about the hedge. The leaves, the branches, all of it seemed darker. Not only that, but the strength and immovability that its presence exerted seemed to wane. Leaves hung dully from their stems, and the branches took on a sickly look. Narrate stepped closer to the natural wall and pulled off a leaf. The Fyevna barely tugged as the leaf willingly departed from its dying bush. He rubbed the leaf between his fingers and sniffed it once before dropping it. Then he turned to Tamlin and Sepheln and lifted his open hand. Dark gray splotches coated the tips of his fingers. It's decayed, Narrate said matter-of-factly. It's gone now, Sepheln whispered. She stared past Narrate and Tamlin at the colorless barrier. But the plants continue to wane. Look! Tamlin watched Threvenelt's hedge wither at an accelerated rate, and for a moment thought his eyes must be playing tricks on him. The twisted branches and bunched leaves simply withered and fell until they lay flat, dead on the ground. They were now free to enter the village. Tamlin glanced at Sepheln, who was staring forward at the top of the ridge that would lead down into the village. Narrate rested his hand on the pommel of his sword at his side and slowly began to crest the small hill. Sepheln followed closely behind. Tamlin let them march on for a moment by themselves while he readied his journal and pencil again. He had only a couple pages written since they left Mezayet, but that would change with the recent events. He quickly scratched some details about the decaying of the plants. He could return later to provide a full description, but in the case things changed even further, he needed to jot down the present state of the vegetation to prepare an accurate record. Tamlin finished his last few thoughts as he began walking, and then slipped the book away again safely to his side. He expected to hear the crunch of the branches under his feet, but all life had been drained from the plants. Tamlin could not smell any mold, but the foliage was definitely withered away to a decayed state. The ground felt mushy with each step, like he was stepping on patches of moss. Cresting the hill finally provided him with a view of What happened? Tamlin said to himself. He paused in his steps as he gazed down at Threvenelt. The small village rested in a wide depression in the ground, surrounded by the hill and, prior to just now, the hedge that shut it in. The sudden plague that destroyed the natural barrier had also wilted every blade of grass and thing that took root around the entire hollow. Even the trees that canopy the village looked sullen, their leaves either having fallen off or hanging dully on limp branches. The killing of the vegetation was just one unusual thing, though. Threvenelt was empty. Save for Nerate and Sepheln, who were slowly approaching the first small home, no one in Talon's view moved. There were no children playing about, no one investigating and puzzling over the sudden rot that had infected the village. It was simply abandoned. Talon pulled out his book once again. Why even bother putting this thing away? There's enough here for me to write the day away. Talon walked slowly toward the village, steadying himself along the way as he wrote detailed descriptions of the state of the village. He wrote now in long form, preferring the full spelling of his words to tell the story that presented itself to him. Talon even wrote a quick note about Nerate and Sepheln as they walked into the village. Perhaps unnecessary, but still an apt depiction of a Fyevna and a Fyevna exploring the unique event. Nerate stepped cautiously into Threvenelt, his hand folded around the pommel of his sword. The tension of something obviously wrong in the village did not strike the Fyevna with fear or worry. No, Nerate embraced the unknown. Sepheln followed Nerate closely, stepping where he stepped. Nerate didn't necessarily mind having to act as a personal guard for Fyevna, except that it was excruciatingly boring most of the time. The position had been created so long ago that he didn't even know if a Fyevna had ever even used his blade in the past, or if it had only ever been for tradition. Even the trips to the outlying villages were little more than a change of scenery. None of Nerate's travels now delivered proper intensity, like his time at the Vuyev, the breaking. Shock the Vuyev. This is my purpose now. Nerate had told himself that too many times to count, but in this moment it may actually matter. The Vuyev had given Nerate purpose in life, what he had always thirsted to do, fight. When all that ended, he was forced into becoming a Fyevna. Sepheln, Nerate said, lowering his voice only slightly. Did you see any of that black stuff anymore? You mean the Zayeth? Sepheln snapped. Whatever you want to call it. Do you see it? This girl wasn't so bad to deal with, except for her incessant correcting of everything. I don't. I see nothing now, except, of course, our personal Zayeth. We are still good, yes? Only been a couple days. Yes, Sepheln answered. We haven't begun to fade just yet. Nerate nodded and continued his steady walk to the center of Threvenelt. The fact that Sepheln and the other Fyevna could see the life force of the Zayeth within each person, within him, had always made Nerate feel uncomfortable, like someone were inside his mind listening to his thoughts. The village was bereft of any inhabitants, not just the presence of people, but any activity as well. The fire pits outside of homes and in social gathering areas had been out for at least a few days. Buckets of water that were set out for washing had soiled. If they had arrived a few days before, Nerate thought that still no one would be present to welcome them. Sepheln tapped Nerate on the shoulder. There, Sepheln said, pointing past the next set of homes. Nerate could see a large opening between the homes, the center of Threvenelt, and where the village kept its eteth, the holder for the Zayeth. Why do they keep theirs in such an open area? Waste of space. Why wouldn't they? Sepheln asked incredulously. I think it's a wonderful thing for a village to display their eteth, a welcoming sight to everyone. Ah, so welcoming in fact that the people never want to leave? Huh? Sepheln huffed and marched past Nerate. Sepheln, I need to go. If we were in danger, we would know by now, Nerate. Sepheln hurried between two homes to the middle of Threvenelt. Nerate stammered under his breath and followed after her. They just don't understand, Sepheln told herself. She barely paid attention to her surroundings as she left Narrate behind her. They'll never get it. Not like me. Sefhelm forced herself to stop and take a deep breath. She needed more time to calm herself, but didn't want Narrate to catch up to her. She walked smoothly, stepping from between two of Threvenelt's empty homes and into the middle of the small village. Unlike some of the other villages that skirted Zayeth, the villagers of Threvenelt had decided to keep their town center empty. Grass, rotted now, would have filled the area, and the only structure, a tall stone basin, stood in the middle. Sefhelm walked across the openness. The Zayeth, that normally would be a colorful display of swirling purples around the basin, was non-existent. She didn't quite know why, but the lack of the life force made Sefhelm feel sad. What would have been an opportunity to see the Zayeth again, concentrated in one place, had instead turned into something hollow and foreboding. The stone container was simple here. Other villages Sefhelm visited displayed theirs sometimes on an ornate pedestal, or decorated the surrounding area with beautiful flora. Threvenelt had decided to set theirs plainly in the opening, fastened to the ground on a forgetful wooden base. The vessel itself was tall, nearly to Sefhelm's neck. It was rounded and narrowed its way from the base to the lip. Inside the Eteth was where water resided, as the conduit for the Zayeth. The narrow lip was sealed with a natural filter made from the same Fyevna armor that Narrate wore. The piece of Fyevna was pressed over the lip by a series of buckles and clasps that shut it firmly. The material would prevent pollution of the water, but still allow the Zayeth to pass freely in and out of the vase. At least, that's what comforted the people. Sefhelm knew nothing could spoil the Zayeth, regardless of what physical contaminants found their way into the Eteth. Sefhelm reached for the first clasp of the Eteth to undo when she heard the sound of pencil to parchment. She turned her attention to the side of the clearing where Tanlin stood. The Fyevnathan faced her, his eyes darting from paper to her, back to his pages, then up again to the Eteth. Sefhelm could understand why Tanlin's job was important, but did he have to be so obnoxious about it? She probably shouldn't have been so annoyed by him journaling her every action. At least he took an interest in the Zayeth, unlike Narrate. But did he have to be so loud? Did they train to write with such force? Sefhelm shook her head and continued unclasping the buckles to the Eteth. Tanlin saw Sefhelm glare at him like he was an uninvited guest to her formal party. He normally would not have been taking detailed notes like this for such a simple task as replenishing the Eteth. But with the uniqueness of the situation, this could be something never seen before. At this thought, he paused and looked up at the lavender mid-morning clouds. If only I could actually see it. Relying on verbal details from Sefhelm told the story each time of the Zayeth's movement and activity. Not once had anything been out of sorts in their time together. Even though Tanlin's desire to see the Zayeth was difficult to ignore, he was able to do so for the convenient reason that nothing exciting ever happened with the Zayeth. Now, though, with the black specks that Sefhelm described, Tanlin was anxious to discover what she would find from the Eteth. Something was happening with the Zayeth here. Whether or not the activity still lingered would be discovered soon enough. The key was getting Sefhelm to describe for him in each moment what was happening, so that the story was accurate. Tanlin shook his head. If only I could see. Sefhelm had started unclasping the Fyevna cap, and Tanlin held his pen ready. She took her time finishing the last few and pulling back the ties. She took a deep breath and quickly removed the top. Tanlin held his pencil, as well as his breath, in anticipation for something to happen. Narrate had done the same, apparently. He stood at the edge of the clearing as well, and he stared unblinking at Sefhelm should he need to assist in any way. Sefhelm stood on her toes to be able to lean over and peer directly down into the Eteth. It's plain, she said, raising her voice so both Tanlin and Narrate could hear. And as she began to undo her Zayeth,
"No Zayeth at all. What are you doing?"
Tanlin asked. Fyevna cocked her head at him, just slight enough so he could see her glare before she returned her attention to her sealed contraption.
"What do you think I'm doing, Tanlin? I'm doing what we came here to do. Fill this eteth." "Wait!"
Tanlin shouted, striding forward with pencil tips still placed on his notebook.
"I'd like to see."
Fyevna sighed and held her Zayeth above the eteth, waiting for Tanlin to approach. Tanlin, in stride, finished jotting down a few more short notes before crossing the distance.
"Right," he said. "Go for it."
Without waiting longer, Fyevna lowered the Zayeth to the rim of the stone eteth and poured a few drops in. Both Tanlin and Fyevna peered inside the eteth. It was dark inside, the narrow neck not allowing much light to pass through. At first, Tanlin thought Fyevna was being careless in her describing the water as plain. There was no distinction between the water and the walls of the vessel with how dark it was.
"Move out of the way,"
Fyevna said, nudging him back. Tanlin watched Fyevna peer into the vessel. She shut one eye and stared with the other, switching back and forth when the opened eye began to dry. Fyevna sighed several times, shifting her weight sharply back and forth in irritation. Tanlin heard Narrate approach from behind them. "Fyevna, maybe if you add more Zayeth to the eteth, it would—"
"Yes, of course,"
Fyevna shouted, still poking her sight down the vessel's neck.
"What a bright idea, wasting even more of our Zayeth. Why ever didn't they make you a Fyevna?"
Tanlin shook his head and glanced back at Narrate. The soldier either didn't notice Fyevna's sudden sharpness or didn't care. Fyevna finally looked up from the eteth and closed her eyes.
"Sorry, Narrate. I just don't know what's happening."
There was a pause, but neither Narrate nor Tanlin said anything. So she continued.
"I can't do much more other than throw some more Zayeth at it, but it's just a waste. There's no more of that black spotted Zayeth. Just nothing. I don't know what to do."
Tanlin cleared his throat and took a step forward.
"Can I look, please?"
This time, Fyevna stepped aside and walked past Narrate, separating herself from her two companions. Tanlin tucked his journal and pencil away and stepped up to the eteth again, staring down the neck with both eyes. It was difficult to see anything at all in the stone vessel. The Fyevna would normally see the Zayeth swirling inside the eteth, but with it being tarnished in some way, short of pouring out the contents, making guesswork by staring into its dark depths was all that could be done. Chances are the Zayeth was just depleted, and all that was left was plain water, the simple medium that allowed the Zayeth to do its work. But that wouldn't answer what happened to the Zayeth Fyevna just poured in. Tanlin blinked several times, looking up at the purple and gray clouds, resetting his focus. Once more he looked down and black, deep black. Tanlin was no longer standing over the basin peering down into it, but instead the darkness had somehow reached up and covered him. He did not feel panic, though. A coolness started to spread over him. He couldn't sense from where it came, either from within or without, but a coolness permeated his skin and flooded his veins. Still, all Tanlin saw was black. A muffled noise interrupted Tanlin's dark trance. It sounded like someone yelling into a blanket. Tanlin blinked, or at least he thought he blinked, but there was no difference between closing his eyes and keeping them open. The blackness was there, surrounding him and held him. Louder now, the muffled noises sounded. Tanlin tried to ignore them, shut them out, but they persisted. Anger swelled in him now, the coolness beginning to rescind its presence. "No," he thought, "not yet." But the coolness reversed its course,
bringing back his normal body heat. The final tingling of the cold ran along his spine, sending a last shiver through him. Then the darkness peeled back, allowing him to see the violet light of day again. The muffled yelling was clearer now, and Tanlin knew it was Sepheln shouting. His normal faculties returning, Tanlin attuned his senses further away from the dark and back to his very real surroundings. Sepheln's voice was clear now as the last of the blackness retreated from him.
Tanlin! Tanlin! What is this fool's problem?
I'm back. I'm here. Tanlin glanced to his side and found Sepheln in disarray. The Cielevnin's face was flushed from yelling, and she gritted her teeth at him.
And what was all that about?
Sepheln asked. Her tone suggested an immediate answer was the only appropriate response.
What?
Tanlin asked.
I don't know.
What do you mean?
What do I mean? What do I mean? I mean, you were just standing there, glazed look, eyes looking nowhere, not answering us?
Tanlin rubbed his eyes and shook his head, stepping away from the Eteth.
Just a trance is all, Tanlin said. Lost in thought, and my focus just locked in. Oh, locked in? Is that what they call it when you lose your Zayeth?
Tanlin started.
What? No, I don't.
Narrate, step aside Sepheln, his presence silencing Tanlin. While the other soldier's face was calm and collected, his hands were white-knuckled on his sword's hilt, a detail Tanlin easily spotted. Tanlin lifted his eyes and stepped back.
All right, maybe you can answer me, since I apparently have no idea what's happening. What's going on? What's happened?
Sepheln scrunched her face and shook her head. She eyed him up and down a few times, then searched above and around him, eyes darting back and forth in bewilderment. At last, she looked into Tanlin's eyes.
Your Zayeth is gone, Tanlin. It's gone.